What I found so attractive about Elm was that it wasn't absolutely obsessed with the notion of monads. It didn't focus on them as the thing you should be doing. It was more like, let's focus on actually making something.
Hey folks, welcome back to Elmtown. I'm your host, Jared M. Smith. We'll be visiting with Christian Rocha today. He's coming from all the way out in the Charm Galaxy. More on that in a bit. But first, let's talk about our sponsor, Logistically. At Logistically, we make intuitive software to help logistics teams make better decisions and improve efficiency. We build the front end for all new features in Elm. If you're interested in our mission and enjoy writing Elm, please drop us a line, elmtown@logisticallyinc.com. Now, Christian. Christian is the founder and CEO of Charm. He has a multidisciplinary design and engineering background and draws inspiration from pop culture, fashion, food, and video games. He's the creator of Bubble Tea, the TUI framework based on and inspired by the Elm Architecture. Christian, welcome to Elmtown.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you on. So I wanted to give a little bit of background here. I had started this Inspired By series by talking to Haley about Gleam, and then I went and talked to Richard about Rock, and then I was looking for something else a little bit different and something else inspired by Elm, and then I happened upon this video, a couple of videos, streams of Bash Bunny, your coworker at Charm, doing an Elm side quest where she went through the Elm official guide. And then I started looking up, hey, what is this Charm? What is this Bubble Tea? And she had mentioned that her inspiration for learning Elm was that the Bubble Tea library was based on Elm. And so that's what kind of led me to you.
Oh, that's good. Bash is such a star. He's such a force. We absolutely adore her.
Yeah, those are good videos. So I'll put links to those in the show notes if folks want to check those out, if you're learning Elm or want to see what the process is like of learning something, or just to check out Bash Bunny. So I want to get started by asking you how you got started in computing and programming. What's your origin story?
Oh man, I started out by hacking on computers in the 90s. I had a 386. I had a 386 with a VGA card, which was so fast. All my friends were jealous. And it was DOS in those days. And I just wanted to make video games work as a 10-year-old. And that really meant editing a bunch of config files to make sure you started off with you got enough memory, like high memory and low memory and stuff. And somehow that became coding and hacking on more computers. And at some point I needed a job, so I managed to convince somebody to let me code for a living and kind of figured stuff out, and here we are.
Right on.
I had a lot of Impostor Syndrome at some point, and I wanted to really, what led me to Elm was that I really wanted to, I wanted to be a really good programmer. And so I thought, and I like hard things. I play video games on the hardest difficulty. And so I thought, okay, well, let's try Haskell then. And it was so hard. As someone who had spent a career doing imperative programming, it was so hard. It was like, it would be like if you studied a few Romance languages and then someone gave you a newspaper in Chinese and was like, here you go, read this, and then walked away. I remember I was just staring at the screen being like, what am I even supposed to do? But eventually I picked it up somewhat. And that's really what led me to Elm, in a way, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, well, I think for me, talking about imposter syndrome, I think that it comes in the way of not having learned Haskell. So a lot of those terms of modads and whatever, I know I use those things in Elm, but I don't have the knowledge to apply those terms to that stuff.
I kind of don't either, to be honest.
Well, I feel like if you're learning Haskell, you have to have some knowledge of it, or at least from what I've heard, a lot of the instructions about how to use different things involve using those terms to explain how to use them. So it's all tangled together, but there may be different documentation and tutorials. But
what I found so attractive about Elm was that it wasn't absolutely obsessed with the notion of monads. It kind of treated them as normal, and then kind of, I don't want to say took them out, like got them out of the way, but almost didn't focus on them as the thing you should be doing. It was more like, let's focus on actually making something. I read this paper I tried to read this paper by Simon Peyton Jones, and he was like, it opened with, monads are taking the world by storm. And I can't even, I mean, I'm sure if you're doing Haskell research, definitely they are, but I can't imagine else. I don't know. It seemed like it was such a weird way to think about coding for me as someone who's very results oriented in a way. Or I guess process based, but I like, trying to get something done. I don't know. It was so what that was Elm was so nice, but it took away all that. It abstracted away all the monads and that you focus on output.
I think, and so I guess to folks who don't know who Simon Peyton Jones is, that's the creator of Haskell, correct?
I'm not sure. I know he's one of the lead kind of scientists on it, or thought leaders, or so to speak. He's one of the big forces behind it.
Okay, I got you.
And he's also famously said Haskell's not good for getting work done.
Right on. Yeah. Well, I think, for me, one of the things that I love about Elm is it's so easy to get started because you are going to see your results in the browser, right? Like you can make a thing visually and have those results versus a general programming language. Oftentimes your first program is running something in, the command line, right? And hopefully getting some result there. So yeah, I think that's something that for me, I was like, oh yeah, I already knew web programming. So that definitely gave me a leg up. Of course, for me, having not learned Haskell first, it was weird because the syntax on Elm was so different. I would look at it and I was like, there was a moment where I thought, maybe I don't need to learn this. And I was like, no, push through. It's going to be fine. And it is. I mean, it's actually, I guess, my preferred. I mean, definitely my preferred syntax now. But, it was just a short period of time, like the first day where I was just like, this doesn't look anything like the C syntax of every other language I've used.
FP is weird, man. I can't believe people use Nix, to be honest, for the same reason. It's like untyped FP. I struggle with Elm too, for sure. Like when I got that, like it took me a long time to understand, update and things like that. And I didn't really get it until I started doing Bubble Tea, actually, until I kind of basically started implementing the Elm architecture, to be very honest.
Yeah, well, that makes sense too. You're trying to really understand it in order to recreate it. So yeah, it's kind of like what you do when you're teaching as well. I found teaching other people, like at work or whatever, it's just like suddenly I have to be able to put it into words, whereas before I could just move from my keys into, the keyboard into the computer and not have to tackle it from a different direction. So yeah. Makes sense. So what was it about Elm that got your attention when your friend John Weir had introduced it to you? Was it the, I know you mentioned that it was kind of simpler and got out of the way, but did you know that going in, or was there something in particular that you were like, oh, okay, this is why I want to learn it?
No, it was John Weir. So John Weir was so important to me as a developer, for sure a better developer, but all of it, at some point he started telling me the things he was doing. At one point he decided he was going to just use Vim all the time, and switch to Vim and do Vim. And again, that for me, that was really hard, having someone that used it's not Vim, basically, and that going through that learning curve. But then, it ended up being a really good decision, and, I was really happy with it. And so at one point he was like, why don't you use Go? And he's like, more like, I'm using Go. And I was like, well, if you're using Go, then I'm going to use Go. And it was great. I was like, again, it was another success. So I had enough great John Weir recommendations that he was like, I'm doing Elm. So I was like, well, I should probably be doing that too, man. And that was really what led me to it. It took me a minute to get used to it, but it was just so much fun. The tooling was just so fast, and I don't know, it was just such a joy. The formatter is absolutely wonderful. I can't find a better formatter, to be quite honest. And just the fact that you can like belt out a line of code and then it just kind of sorts it out for you. It's just amazing. Just absolutely, just so much fun to work with.
You're talking about how John was, I guess, a mentor for you, right? As he kind of giving you some different things to check out and inspired you to check out Elm. That's cool.
Early on in our career, he was making libraries when I was just like writing code. And I was like, I didn't know that people I know can write libraries. It was very inspirational for me to kind of understand that I could actually build tools for other people too. It was a big moment when I saw him doing things like that, contributing to open source and stuff like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you were close to someone who was doing these things, and that definitely, it makes you realize like, oh, that's a real person. I can talk to this person. This person makes these things, they're not some Ubermensch,
Yeah. I mean, coming back to Impostor Syndrome, I just thought like, I'm definitely not a good enough developer to make libraries, for heaven's sakes,
Right on. But you have, and you did. And so how did you go from Elm to, I'm taking this idea to Go on the command line, the idea of the Elm architecture?
Starting Charm, I had this vision for building TUIs in line in context in the terminal in a way that they would kind of open up something small and let you do an action quickly without too much typing, and then kind of go back to what you're doing and close up. And Go made the most sense for doing things in the terminal, in that you could build statically linked binaries very easily and cross-compile them, and you got Windows support, you got BSD support, you had Linux support and macOS support, obviously. It just seemed like a very natural choice. And it looked like going into it that there was this huge array of this kind of like renaissance happening of TUI libraries. And it turned out after getting started that there were, some were abandoned, but they all used the alt screen, which was like the full terminal. And there was nothing that opened up in mine. So it was and so after a lot of trying to find something and a lot of pain, I was kind of like, well, I guess we're going to have to write something ourselves. And having done Elm, what I really was hoping for was something that didn't have to involve, like something where you could give it a view, tell it what you wanted the UI to look like, and have the renderers basically figure it out for you. So you didn't have to go do low level and curses type of stuff. And so somehow in there, it turned out that even Go is the most imperative language in the world. The type system is such that you can type system is such, and it has first class functions, so that you could basically coggle together an Elm-like kind of situation with channels and with types and with functions, basically. And that's sort of what happened. And it was just almost this accidental success because it turned out other people wanted to do that too, I guess.
Yeah. So by success, you mean that people use the library?
Yeah, we put it out there. We open sourced it because a big thing was starting Charm was like, we really wanted to be open source, like open source first, and it just made sense for the CLI. I think it made sense for developer trust and being able to kind of open up libraries and look at them and, make sure they're not doing anything malicious. And also just, open source was cool, was what it really was. So we open sourced it, and actually some of the most important contributions to it came from the open source world, and there are things that we're able to do with it now that we would not have possibly been able to do on our own. So in that regard, it was it was really, really great that it was a wonderful decision to open source that and everything else.
As we're talking about bringing the Elm architecture to Go, there is a question from John Weir here. He says, quote, "What difficulties in bringing the Elm architecture-ish to Go, and would Go's generics make that easier or better today? The type systems are quite different," end quote.
So the biggest thing for me is that there are no sum types. And so essentially you can't exhaustively switch over, or I guess pattern match over a type. And so you just have to be very thorough. And the linters kind of help with that. But that's the biggest thing for me that I would love to see in Go. Generics haven't really helped much. Surprisingly, I don't know why, but we're kind of fine just type switching, because the type switches are actually pretty good. And it kind of stands in the place of generics, I think, for what we need. But otherwise, it's an oddly good match somehow. The biggest hurdle, the biggest problem I see is that because it's not purely functional. It's possible for developers to go, say, mutate the model in a view or something like that. And it's kind of like a Scala type of thing where you have to just stand by your guns and not do all the things that mutate stuff all over the place.
Right on. Yeah. Well, I only played with the bubble tea a little bit, but that was one of the things that I noticed, that there didn't seem to be exhaustive type checking. And I was going to ask about that because I was looking at the different, looking for my message, like what options do I have here with this, and how do I add one? And then I kind of figured that out, like, oh, okay, this can really be anything. So yeah, but that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, obviously there are trade-offs there, right? But you've made it work. And so I guess we could talk a little bit about the related products, about things you've built on top of Bubble Tea a little bit. You want to talk about that?
The first thing we built on with Bubble Tea was really Glow. And, that really helped us kind of build out the kind of component ecosystem. When you think about Elm, there's, you get the little input or little text area. You kind of get it for free, basically, because it's coming from the browser. But in the terminal, none of those things exist. So we had to code it from scratch, basically. There's a ton of nuance that goes into a nice little text input, having, modifier keys and jumping between characters and words and end of the line, beginning of the line, and how the things scroll when you get off we'd scroll horizontally, when you get out of the viewport, so to speak, that little thing. Double width runes, which are a whole situation, and East Asian characters and emojis and things like that. And that was really what kind of Glow did. And Glow is a markdown viewer with a TUI around it, so you can kind of browse and find markdown on your local machine. At one point, and I'd say this was probably the most effective use of Bubble Tea, and I would say truest to its intent of being like a little thing that opens up TUIs for you. We wanted to bring kind of all the stuff we've done with the components of Bubble Tea, bubbles, we would call them, and Lip Gloss, which is our kind of library for layout and styling, I guess, on the CLI. We wanted to kind of bring that to people who didn't code Go. So we made a library called Gum, and Gum was basically exposing all these little sort of UIs that you could pipe stuff into or pipe stuff or send stuff out from, and you can kind of fit into command line pipeline. So there's a little thing called Gum Write where it'll open up a little text area. If you pipe something into it, it'll populate the little text area, and then you can send that out. So what we do a lot of times, you could make a little script, or you could Gum Write and then pipe it into a Git commit message, and then you'd have a little TUI for that. A lot of little tiny things that make life easier. We even saw Greg KH, the Linux kernel maintainer, use it in his scripts and contribute to it, which was a humbling moment, to be sure. But it was just such a handy little bit of interactivity. And I guess all that comes down to the fact that people don't want to type as much on the command line, I guess.
Yeah, some really neat stuff that's come out of it. One that really blew my mind was the TUIs over SSH. That's really crazy. That was
such a moment. We had this library called Wish, which was for basically making applications with SSH as a protocol. And we had Bubble Tea, and then at one moment we were like, beep, and we put them together. We were like, wait a minute, we can serve TUIs over SSH, and it worked like a charm. No, or I guess pun intended. If you go to git.charm.sh, that's soft serve, or self-hostable Git server for the command line that Eamon here in New York really kind of brought to life. It's essentially it's a wonderful show of force of kind of all of our work in a way. It has Wish, our SSH library, and Bubble Tea, our TUI library, and the Git functionality in Wish, and Bubbles, all those kind of utilities or components, I guess, for Bubble Tea. And it works on your phone if you have a terminal on your phone like I do, and it uses the mouse so you can tap it. It's a wonderful kind of demo, I think, for all the different things we're thinking about and what we can do. It's a really special one. It's very, very, very interesting. I think it's a kind of a notion that has so much more we can get from it without, I don't know, we haven't spent enough time thinking about it as a community.
Sure. Yeah. But that's really cool. I do recommend checking out that git.charm.sh. It's a pretty mind-blowing thing. And I'm guessing that because you have like READMEs in there, you can render the markdown in those. Like those things are all because you've built these other libraries, right?
Yep, exactly. Oh yeah, so that's a lot of things coming together. We have that's Glamour, the markdown renderer, and Bubble Tea and Bubbles and Wish. It's really a great it's a great kind of thing. It's a great piece for demoing what Charm kind of can do because it has so many different parts to it.
Really cool. Let me ask you, how does your background in design inform your work on Bubble Tea and the related products at Charm?
Yeah, that's a good question. We spend a lot of time with the kind of visual nuance and attention to detail and brand. I think it's such an important part of our work, and I think it's important for tech. One of the things I really wanted to do when we started Charm was sort of change the way technology speaks to people and change the way tech companies challenge the notion of what a tech company can look like and what a tech company can sound like. And on the brand side, that meant it being silly and kind of having fun and being playful and taking a kind of like dampening this sort of hyper masculine narrative, for lack of a better word. And then in the CLI itself, it just means actually spending design effort on a CLI, which I think has really worked for us because you don't see that much design on the command line space. There are some beautiful TUIs out there, though, don't get me wrong. Lots of stuff from our community and from just kind of the larger community as well. But I think having design be part of the conversation, part of the main conversation for a tech company, is something you don't see that often, especially for someone making developer tools. And so it's been very, very important for us.
Yeah, I think it's really neat. And I think it's neat. Like one example that really popped out to me is, no pun intended, no, pop's another tool, but VHS is very cool, I think. And you can talk a little bit about what that is. But one of the things that I liked was the little GIF that shows how it demonstrates how it works. It has this cool like beta filter on it. And as a kid, I had a beta player. And so it was like, it really stuck out to me. I was like, oh, this is really neat. I mean, just the concept of VHS in general, which, you can talk about, but that was just like, whoa, that's not something I've seen before. And, just really, yeah. I guess it was not just like a rational, it spoke more, emotionally to me.
Oh yeah. Emotions are really strong. That's why I got into branding, because I thought like, well, you could build products or you can do branding and affect people emotionally. And they're all important, but I found it very, very powerful to kind of be able to work on an emotional level as well as a practical one. When I was in school, I did a lot of motion design, and that's kind of where that came from. And this was like After Effects, like post-production on a terminal recording, I guess, on a VHS recording. That's VHS is the product. Yeah, that's been just, I think overdoing the visuals is kind of what we do, what I think is important, because the terminal itself is so minimal and so flat that overdoing everything else and using 3D in our work and stuff is an important contrast. Also, but also it's just fun, and it's just fun to be opulent, and that's kind of how we are.
Yeah, it is fun. So, what is VHS? What is it for?
VHS is for scripting. Basically, what happened was we had been making GIFs were such an important part of our work and marketing and kind of showing what we're doing. Basically, READMEs are a thing we spend a lot of time on thinking about, because it's in order kind of to deliver, to kind of help people understand what's going on. And GIFs are so great because they're silent and they loop, and you can't stop them, but they also kind of don't bother you as long as they're not too crazy. And so, and they autoplay. So we kind of really leveraged the GIF, and we had done a lot of engineering on making good GIFs. And then at some point, it made sense to one of our engineers, Moss, had enough with GIF recording, and scripted this, and kind of went down this rabbit hole and scripted this whole entire situation for scripting GIFs and then recording GIFs, and then it had its own language, and then there was like a tree sitter implementation, and then the language got into GitHub somehow, and then into Helix, this text editor. It was a great exercise on on just kind of going all the way. And we didn't know it was going to be such a success. We thought we were just going to open source it and kind of get on with our day. But yeah, it turns out it's a thing a lot of people want to do. And I guess ASCII Cinema is a good testament to that.
ASCII Cinema. Tell me about that.
Oh, man. ASCII Cinema is absolutely brilliant. It's been a while since I used it because we have VHS, but it records terminal sessions to what I want to say is a JSON file. And then you can literally play back what happened in the terminal with JSON. And it's amazing because it's a data format. It's a lossless format. You could conceivably go back and change the font or change the background color and stuff. The only reason it didn't work for us is because it doesn't autoplay, and it's a video. It's essentially, you can't embed it in a GitHub README.
All right. So that was something that already existed.
Yeah. ASCII Cinema has been around for a long time. It's a wonderful, wonderful format. Again, it's technically a video format, but it's its own thing, and it's absolutely brilliant. It just doesn't fit in a GitHub README quite well.
Right on. Okay. Your first commit on Bubble Tea was in January of 2020, or 4.5 years ago.
Oh, man.
How has the architecture of Bubble Tea held up? Are you still happy with that choice?
We are. We're working on a V2 right now, which is a lot of stuff under the hood and based on our learnings. But I would say, by and large, it hasn't changed much. There was the biggest change actually happened in the beginning, when originally there was like a program function, and you would pass 4 functions to it: init, update, and view. 3 functions, I guess. And there was a subscriptions one, which didn't really make sense, so we took it out. And then one of the first issues that came in from the community was, well, why don't you just make these methods on the model, and that way all this stuff makes more sense. We were like, oh yeah, you're right. And I would say ever since then, kind of nothing has changed. There's a bunch of low-level things which around the way, lip gloss, a styling library, and Bubble Tea kind of work together that were corrected in V2, but otherwise it's almost the same. It's surprisingly okay.
Nice. Okay.
It feels a little bit weird in Go, I will admit, still this kind of functional paradigm in an imperative language, and we get a lot of issues. We get feedback from the community about it, but for some reason it just seems to it's okay. I don't know why.
Nice. Okay. Well, so what are you excited about these days?
What am I excited about? I'm still interested in shells and terminals, and the way I think there's a lot of undiscovered territory there. Mitchell Hashimoto, who founded HashiCorp, he's doing this terminal called Ghosty, which is by and large a very traditional terminal, but there's just so much attention to detail there, and I think ultimately, there is a larger vision for what terminals could be that he's working on. I think that's exciting. We spend a lot of time thinking about really, really nerdy, low-level terminal things and shells and how they can talk to each other and how they could. I think encryption is very interesting. It's something we're thinking more about, SSH and encryption and things like that, and things that I think that really matter to open source. Those are the things I find really exciting in a nerdy kind of a way.
Cool. Well, we'll have to stay tuned and see what comes. One thing that I just thought of as we were talking about Elm earlier, you had mentioned before we had started that, and I didn't know this before we started talking, was that there is Elm on the website. I guess there's still Elm on the website. Is that true?
Little bits of it, yes, here and there. The first website we did was all Elm. It was just 100% Elm, which was really fun. But as we grew, it made more sense to just do plain old static HTML, but which is a wonderful thing, I must say. But there are still components of some components of the old site that are little Elm bits in there, and it's nice to see that they've done great all these years, and we're able to kind of embed them in HTML the way they were intended to be, I guess, in some capacity, in like maybe early Elm thinking. Yeah.
No, totally. I think most of my career that I've used Elm has been starting with Elm in an existing project where it was already using AngularJS or, some other framework. And so now you've got to start transitioning that to Elm, and the way that we've always done it is to embed that inside of the Angular. So there, there'll be some directive that's, a little bit of Elm, little element of Elm in there. And it really works that way. And I mean, we've made it, I've been working at this company almost 6 years, and we still have some Angular in there, and we still have to embed Elm around the edges. But I mean, most of it we're transitioning to like Elm pages and like all that stuff. But there's still there's a lot of code. It's a pretty useful technique, and I think it's really aged well. It still works. So
you talked about Rock. Rock is similar, like Elm on the server, I want to say, in a way, right?
Well, it has this concept of platforms, and I can't really do it justice. When I was talking with Richard about it, he does a much better job of explaining it. I think there's this vision of Elm on the back end that Evan has that is really kind of like, if you just want like Elm across the board. I think what Richard is going for, and again, I can't really do this justice, is like this idea of places where it's like, it's not just like on the server, but it's like you want to like run an embedded, like Raspberry Pi, like you want to run it there. Or like, something that I think is really cool is that with Rock, you can call it directly from within other programming languages. And they have examples of that in TypeScript and Python, which is what we use on the back end. So that's where I'm kind of tracking and keeping an eye on that. But yeah, it's got some really neat properties to it. And I think probably just checking it out and talking to the folks in that community know more than me would be the way to understand it. But
that sounds so fun. Elm on a refrigerator. I have this vision of like writing code for refrigerator firmware for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. It's there. If there's a screen there, it's like, I want to pull up the TUI and, and
Oh, I know. TUI's on a refrigerator. Wouldn't that be fun? TUI's on a stove.
Yeah, it's great. Why not? Eating the world. It's wonderful.
Oh, man. Seriously. I would love to find a way to get TUI's at some point outside of the terminal too. It's hard. There's a kind of abstract notion I've been kind of toying around with my head, and I can't really put it to words, but something beyond the terminal would be really interesting. I would love to see it.
Yeah, you got to stay out there in the in the galaxy and just kind of see where it all goes.
Yeah.
Love it. All right. Well, you want to move on to picks?
Yeah, let's do picks.
All right. So what picks do you have for us today, Christian?
Oh man. So I've been, so of course I was, super, super into Hades, this video game that I think everyone's kind of into who likes roguelikes. And I somehow found this video game called Go Mecha Ball. It's like a really, really indie sort of thing. There's no story whatsoever, but you're this cat that can roll up into a ball and slam into things, and you've got like guns, and you reload by rolling up into a ball and slamming into things. It's a whole situation, but it's so high energy and so kind of, it requires so much, it's so, for lack of a better word, action packed. I've been playing it on plane flights the entire time. I flew back from Berlin a couple weeks ago, and I played it on the entire flight for all 7 hours straight. It was absolutely wonderful. And kind of so mindless in a way, because it's like the kind of roguelike where you do it and then you play it again, and you die and then you play it again. I don't know. For me, it was good. Someone who needs a lot of stimulation. There's also this TV show that came out a couple years ago called The Great, which I was sort of obsessed with. It's loosely based on Catherine the Great, but it's absolutely ridiculous. It's so irreverent and so bizarre that it works for me, I guess, in terms of it's one of the few things that's able to like catch me off guard and make me not actually believe what they're doing on the screen. So I recommend that highly. There's always my favorite movie of all time is this movie called Tampopo, which I recommend too. It's a kind of a indie cult classic maybe. It's about it's set in Japan in the 80s, and it's about food, and it's about these different ways of looking at food and food in society, and it has a semi-linear storyline which is interesting, and it's shot like a Western. it's silly, but also a bit of a masterpiece at the same time. I can't recommend it enough without revealing too much of it. It's like a Western gangster movie about food. It's in Japan. It's so special. A huge source of inspiration for me.
That sounds really cool. How do you spell Tampopo?
Tampopo. It's called, it means dandelion.
Oh, beautiful. I'll have to add that to the show notes, as well as the other picks. All very cool. Well, I have a few picks, so sit back. My first pick is a game called Teardown, and it is a sandbox voxel-based game, kind of puzzle game as well, and it's kind of mindless in a way. It's got these just beautiful graphics where you just kind of break things and explode things, and they break in wonderful ways, and you can really interact with the environment. It does have some different things that you can do that are a little more involved, and there's races and just kind of these time-based things that you have to accomplish. But yeah, it's just kind of a game that's pretty easy to get into. For me, I'm not like a really heavy, hardcore gamer. I'm like, put it on easy mode, and then if I can get halfway through it, then I'm like, all right, I'm good. I'll do, like that's enough for me. But so it's easy to get into, and I really like that. The next one is a musician, Dan Bull. He is a kind of nerd rapper, like game type rapper. These suggestions are all because my 8-year-old kid is into this stuff, and so then I end up getting into it. But he's got this song called Satisfactory Night Fever. Apparently it's about a game, but I like it. There's another one, I'm Heading Out of My Mind. And then another one, Quiet Please, which is a warden rap, like a Minecraft warden rap. That's fun. And then the next one is it's a band called Glass Animals. And particularly, I recommend this because as I try to kind of relate things to the guest, I think particularly the Dreamland album kind of reminds me of Charm and of the kind of vibe of you here and Christian, and kind of thinking about design. It's kind of weird here, but I see like I'm looking at your background is very purple, and then you have this like kind of like brown in the foreground, and like I'm wearing this purple shirt, and then I have brown in the background. I don't know why, that just kind of like there's like this like a yin yang kind of symbolism going on here.
Your background is light, my background is dark mode, light mode.
Yeah.
I only use light mode, by the way. Cannot use, at least in the daytime. Cannot use dark mode in the daytime. Yeah. It's too sad.
Yeah, I used to use dark mode for everything. I thought, that was just like the hardcore way to do it. And then I was just kind of like, I'm getting older, I guess, or something. And I was just like, let me try not making my eyes work more. And yeah, it was a good choice.
I have one more pick actually too.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, if it's okay. I mean,
yeah, of course.
I got this foldable bike, this Brompton bike that I'm completely obsessed with. My son got a bike, and so I was like, well, I'm going to get a bike. And then I was like, well, bikes always get stolen in New York City, so maybe I'll get like a folding bike. So I went and got this like little dorky folding English bike, and it's the best thing I purchased in like, I don't know, since buying a home or something. It's just, I'm absolutely obsessed. I take it to restaurants. I take it to nice restaurants. It never gets stolen. I use it as a shopping cart. I cannot, it never gets, I don't know. It's like 17 pounds. I like shred the city bikes, the electric city bikes, like shred the hills. It's been the best thing to happen to me since, I guess, I don't know, having a kid and writing Elm.
Right on. That sounds really cool. What's the brand of it? Brompton? Brompton.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Well, that's kind of perfect. That leads me into another pick that I have. Did you have anything else before?
No. I've got out of picks, I think.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's actually perfect because I have this book recommendation called Bicycle Diaries. It's by David Byrne, the lead singer of Talking Heads, and he writes in this book about, he's based out of New York City, and Some of it's about riding bikes in New York City. So I think that, fits very well. But he also has this folding bike, believe it or not, that he brings when he, goes to play in different cities around the world. So he has there'll be a chapter about, I don't know, just different cities. I'm trying to think of one. It's been a while since I read it. He has Istanbul, Buenos Aires, San Francisco, London. So he talks about what the experience is like from the perspective of someone riding a bike versus someone who is in a car, and talks about how the urban landscape, how the design or lack of design shapes how people interact with an area, and kind of how it shapes the culture. And it's just a very fun book. It's not it's not too deep. It's I don't know, it's kind of gripping, but yeah, if you're into bikes, or especially folding bikes, I want to check that out.
Yeah. It's funny, here in Brooklyn, there are all these public bike racks designed by David Byrne, which makes sense now.
Yeah. Okay. So what's the design? What makes it?
I want to say they're words. They're words that you can, there's these metallic letters basically that spell things that you can clamp your bike onto. I think if I recall, they say things with regard to biking, although I could be wrong about that. It's been a while since I've read one, but I see them all the time.
Right on. Yeah. I'm gonna have to go look that up now.
Yeah.
Didn't know about that. Cool. Wow. Lots of connections here. Very cool. Okay. Well, I guess that's it. So thanks for
having me.
Yeah. Thanks for coming. Thanks for everybody who's out there listening, and please rate and share if you're enjoying the show. And thanks, Christian, for coming to Elmtown.
Thank you.